Good morning, everyone. My name is Charmin Brianas, and we are the Group 3. Today's topic is we will tackle about phonology. And here are the agenda for today's discussion. So, what is phonology? Before we start, let me give you just a quick example so you can get a grasp on what phonology means. An example would be if I say, can I have a glass of water? Or can I have a glass of water? Maybe can I have a glass of water? So our brain knows that these words have the same meaning. They just means water or H2O, and they treat these different sounds as equivalent. So this isn't just only for the letter T in water, but all of the sounds or hand shapes of a language can be produced differently depending on the context. So different languages and accents have their own variation. These patterns and the study of them is known as phonology. Phonology is a branch of linguistics concerned with the study of speech sounds with reference to their distribution and patterning. The word phonology came from the Greek word phone, which means voice or sound, and logy came from the word logos, which means subject of discussion. So basically, phonology means the study of speech sound. So segments in contrast. The core principle in phonology is the idea of contrast, meaning strikingly different, contrastive. Say we have two sounds that are different from each other. So if the difference between those two sounds leads to a difference in meaning in a given language, then we say that those two sounds contrast in that language. An example is the phonetic difference between the F and V is contrastive. Why? Because it changes the meaning of the word. So we conclude that F and V are two different phonemes in that language because they contrast causes a difference in pronunciation and meaning. So next would be the phonetically conditioned variation, which is the phonemes and allophones. So one of the trickier concepts is what's the difference between the phonemes and allophones. So let's start with the concept of phonemes. So what is a phoneme? A phoneme is typically considered the smallest unit of speech sound that distinguishes one word from another word in a particular language. So phonemes are segments that contrast with each other in a particular language. So they differentiate words, causes a difference in meaning. So if we take a look at this example, we had phoneme M, A, and T, which makes up the word mat. So the sound in your head would be like and T. So since this is contrastive, if we contrast phonemes, example would be the bus and buzz. So buzz is a voiceless alveolar fricative, meaning your Adam's apple is not vibrating, while buzz is a voiced alveolar fricative, meaning your Adam's apple is vibrating. So what's the difference between the buzz and buzz? So we all know that these two words differentiate in meaning. The point is that S and Z are two different sounds because they contrast meaning. So same goes with the sip and zip. They contrast by only one segment in the same position. So we consider that S and Z are different phonemes in English because they contrast in this language, causing a difference in meaning. So in English, there are 44 phonemes or word sounds that make up the language. So they're divided into consonants, or controlled sound, long and short vowels, and so on. So these are some examples of contrastive phonemes. We call this pair of words minimal pairs. So minimal pairs consist of two words with different meanings that differ in their forms by only one segment in the same position. As you can see, the last segment has different sounds, and that's why they contrast. Like tap and tab, the phoneme here is P and B. Same goes to the pick and pig, and so on. So to simplify it, if you just think S and Z as purely as sound segments, then you're thinking of them as phones, which is phonetics. But whether they make a semantic difference or contrastive, then they are different phonemes, which is the study of phonology. And take note that phones exist as sound, but phonemes are mental reality. So phonemes only exist in our mind. But when we're actually speaking, though, that's when we use allophones. So, allophones is a phonetic realization of a phoneme. It is a kind of phoneme that changes its sound based on how a word is spelled. So, since phonemes only exist in our mind, allophone is a reality of phonemes. So, you can distinguish between an allophones and a phonemes by looking at a letter and how it's being used. So, let's take a look at this example below. We have the words stop and top. So, we can see that they have the same phoneme, which is the T, but one is aspirated and one is unaspirated. So, what is aspirated and unaspirated? So, if you put the palm of your hand right in front of your mouth like that, try to utter the word stop and top. So, you can see or you can feel the difference with the puff of air. So, if it's aspirated, which is top, top, so you can feel that there's a puff of air. But when it is an unaspirated T, for example, we stop, you don't feel any puff of air. So that's the difference between the aspirated and unaspirated. But the crucial thing about these allophones is that when we try to switch those sounds around, it doesn't result in a change of meaning. For example, would be the word top. Whether you use aspirated T or unaspirated T, it's still going to be the same. For example, you say, I'm the top in our class, or I'm the top in our class. It doesn't result in a change of meaning. We're still talking about the same word, which is top. It's just that when we use the unaspirated T, it sounds weirder. Maybe a non-native pronunciation, but it doesn't change the meaning. So in conclusion, phonemes are contrastive. They can change meaning when you switch one sound with another sound, while allophones are a phonetic variation of the same phonemes, but different pronunciation. So remember that substituting one phoneme for another changes both pronunciation and meaning, while substituting one allophone for another only changes the pronunciation. And let me give you a fun fact that apparently speakers of the language are consciously aware of phonemes but not allophones, unless they took a course in linguistics.